All right. So, what we're going to go through today is going through the discussion of settings and panes as panes as well as views, and some of how the content aware information actually works. Now, what I've done to prep for this is done as much due diligence as I can to get this my Arc Pro reverted back to 3.2.1 so that everything should look like what it would have looked like for you when you first open the software. The comment that I'm going to make about that that's kind of funny is almost instantaneously, as soon as you start working in a project, almost instantaneously, you start getting new panes open in the software just by using the software. So over time, you will see what it is that you use on a regular basis. And your ability to work in the software will shift based off of that. Not will shift, but will be influenced by how that operates. So right now I've got it on that opening splash screen. I'm going to go ahead and open up a project, and you'll see that by default, it is bare bones. We have the table of contents on the left. We have the catalog on the right. As you saw from the previous two videos, my right pane had multiple tabs down here along the bottom, and that's because I had been using the software for about a year. So you started to see how I function as a byproduct of, sorry, well, I guess that's a fair way to say it. You see as a byproduct of how I function, what editing features show up for me. And it truly is kind of a dynamic environment. And if you leave things alone, there are things show up and don't show up relative to that. The other thing I'm going to talk about really quickly is if you need the real estate on your monitor for the view, remember this is our view, this is a pane, and this is a pane. If you need more real estate, you can pin these to the sides, giving yourself more view. My contents is still here. I click on it, it shows up. I click on it, it disappears. My catalog, I click on it, it shows up. I click on it, it disappears. I tend to like not having those pinned. It's a personal preference for me. It's just one of the things that I kind of function with on my own by actually not by physically having them pinned. That is pinned. Sorry, that's the statement I should have made. That is pinned. So for the most part, this is that default view that you see right off of the bat. There's nothing magical or nuanced about how this starts. This is how this starts. The comment that I will make is a lot of the functionality that you have in your ArcGIS will be dependent on what it is you do on a day-to-day basis. This shifts as you get into different realms of GIS, or will stay the same if you just basically do a few basic processes. So, with these panes talked about, we'll go in more detail now about some of the settings. And I'm going to do a couple things where you're going to see the ArcGIS software close and open. And the other comment that I forgot to make at the beginning that I need to make is my office is being remodeled. So all of my notes for this lecture are at the office. They are not here. So I don't have everything. So I do have a sneaking suspicion I'll be able to get through most of this without those notes, but there may be a few things that I do miss. And you're going to see me open and close the software a couple of times so that you can see the changes take effect. So one of the first things I wanted to start off by doing is talking about all of the settings that are available to you. So as you saw, I clicked on project. It kicks out. These are settings for this instance of the project. I can go to my options, and this pulls up the dialog box of all of the ArcGIS options that are available to us in Pro. Now, off the cuff, I can say probably without worry that there are more options available to you in Arc Pro than there were in ArcMap. Partly that may not feel entirely true because when you used to go to ArcMap options and open that up, there was only a set number of things that were available to you. The problem is all of these other options were somewhere else. Most of these options were somewhere else. And the reason why I say I'm pretty sure there's more options here, because if I just do this generally speaking, ArcMap didn't have dark mode. Arc Pro has dark mode. So at least there's N+1 options available to us. The more we go into this, the more there is. So if we talk about editing, the ability to enable and disable editing, as a function is another option that's new in Arc Pro. So there's 2, but then we talk about auto saving. So there's 3, but then there's auto saving the project. There's 4. So likely there are more options in Pro than there were in ArcMap, but basically the same options that were available to you more or less in ArcMap are available in Arc Pro. There's a few things that I just thought of that aren't entirely solid and set in Arc Pro the same way as they were in Map. The other discussion point when we're talking about settings is, remember, we have project specific settings and we have the application settings. The whole kit and caboodle happens here. Things that are specific to this project are saved here. And there are a few different settings that we can work through. So you can see that by default, I've got my project name, I've got where it's saved, I've got its home folder, I've got its project geodatabase, and I've got its default toolbox. Right off the bat, those are basically set. The other thing that's nice about this is right here, learn about changing project settings. If you were to click on that, it would pull up a a website page. It's the not e-learning. It's the Esri GIS help files that are available. That anytime if you hit, if I'm not mistaken, it's the F1 key, and you're on a tool or you're on a function or something like that, it will pull up those help files for you. We have talked about units in that first discussion, and I want to hit that again because there are very important things that I think you should know about from the get-go. And one of the key ones is, by default, Arc Pro defaults to quadrant bearing. I don't know of a single person in the Bureau who uses quadrant bearing in their measurements with their Brunton or any other measurements. Most commonly, everyone uses north azimuthal. So my recommendation is, for every project, this is the downfall, for every project, you will have to set the default direction units to the north azimuthal. It's kind of a pain in the butt. I understand that. If we did silent installs of this software, there's some of those settings that I can tweak, and I haven't dug into that too far yet to figure out what I can lock into these options by default. But some of these things can be pre-configured for us in that default setting. And again, I haven't messed with that too much. We'll get there at some point and see what I can actually set for everyone. So that's the one that right off the bat I recommend. There's also your distance units, because we are American, they default to feet. I almost automatically come in my distance units, set that to meters. Angular units, degrees, or DMS are just fine. I don't mind either of these. Area units, I tend to default to my square meter. My location units, I basically leave as decimal degree or DMS. That's kind of a personal preference, up to you. For all of these are kind of a personal preference. Again, this is the one that I see most people getting caught on, because they'll try and orient to a direction, or they'll try and throw a line to a direction or something like that. And it doesn't work because it's looking for that quadrant bearing notation versus the north azimuthal notation. So that's one thing that I comment on. And then your page units, again, I still think in inches when it comes to layouts. So I've got this weird hybrid nature to me. I should really abandon that, but it's because we buy paper in the standard units. So that's why my brain still thinks of paper in standard units when we're talking about the plotter. 2D and 3D symbols, I wouldn't worry about those unless you really want to get into those. We could do some neat things with 3D maps on them and stuff like that. But these are more the ones I wanted to talk about. If there were some tasks, we can set up operations so that digitizers could only function and do digitizing tasks, and it would be like a checklist of things that they need to go through. So you can set up kind of routines here for people to do. If we come into the application settings, now remember, this is my project settings. These are my application settings. So in here, if I want, I can click on Start ArcGIS Pro. You heard me in that first and second lecture. It always starts on that splash screen that's similar to this screen right here. That is, then I said that that's not entirely true. It's because of this function right here. You can set it up to start with a default project or without a project template, or just show that splash screen. That's why I said that was kind of a lie. And then in here, create projects. How do you want to create projects? How do you want things to function in here? So project location, new project locations are saved to the default location. New projects are saved in a custom location. This will depend on how you function with things, but you could set this up to where it always defaults to say your D drive or something like that instead of your H drive or some network drive somewhere. Create a folder for the project. This is where we can tweak some of the things for how projects save with regard to when we imported our MXD, we saved the project as Arc so that it wrote all of those settings into that folder. This is one area where we could cheat that and do it a different way. Don't create a folder for the project, just save the project and all the project things in that folder of our specifications. 6 of one, half dozen of the other. Because this is the default, I wanted to show you how to operate with that default setting. And as time goes on, you may modify this yourself. Default geodatabases, default toolboxes. Again, we touched on those a little bit. We don't have default geodatabases or default toolboxes for our teams. That may be something that happens in the future. So there's nothing much due with those. Help source. Again, when you hit that F1 key or you click these buttons down here, online help from the internet kicks you to the Esri files. And the reason why I recommend using those instead of the offline ones don't update at the same sequence that the online help files update. So if you use those online help files, they pop up in a window all by itself. I remember when I first started with ArcMap and they switched to the online help files, I was all up in arms because I wanted them in the software and I realized over time, it's like, oh, it's actually better if it goes to the website because it kicks up a different pane. It doesn't interrupt what I'm doing. I can just switch my focus, read what I'm reading, and go, oh, how does that apply? Oh, okay. So personal preference there. I'm not saying don't use the offline files. I'm just saying that there are drawbacks to them. And then the other one is application theme. Currently, I am in light. I can switch to dark. And the comment that I'm going to make with that is watch what happens when I switch to dark. It warns that we need to restart the application for your theme changes to take effect. There's a couple of these in here, and this is something to be kind of cognizant of. You wouldn't have want to set some of these settings in the middle of a project that you haven't saved and all of those things because it requires you to shut down. Yes, it'll ask you if you want to save, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But my recommendation is kind of set these settings before the project, before you move into working on the project, so that you don't have to start things over and over again. So I'm going to go ahead now and go through the rest of this really quickly. Do you want to participate in the Esri user experience? Yes, I want you all to participate in the Esri user experience because that gives Esri feedbacks for bugs, errors, warnings, and glitches and things that happen. The more of those that they get, the more likely bug fixes are to happen before we even report them because they'll see those changes and then go ahead and send them out to us. Project recovery. This is the last one I'm going to do before I shut everything down and move on to restarting the software and going through the rest of these. But project recovery, this is one of the best things, and we touched on this in those first two lectures, is the fact that project recovery now can auto-save your project and save backups every 5 minutes. That means if you've been working for 45 minutes and Arc Pro crashes, don't worry, you only lost the last 5 minutes or less of your project relative to when it last made a backup. Everyone should be giddy and happy and arms and woo, because that is one of the most amazing things, in my opinion, that Esri has ever done is installing that backup plan. It's a huge savings for us. However, anything that you do to your project that you didn't mean to do, if you aren't making your own backups, you can't get back to how it was before. So be cognizant of the fact that it will be auto backing up for you. Those changes will take effect even if you didn't mean to. Because you close the project, the backups will be functioning on things. And it's more if it crashes. If it crashes, it goes to that backup. It won't really prompt you that it did that. So if you've made changes and it prompts a crash, you end up back at the settings right before it saved. If those changes were within 5 minutes, those changes are permanent to the project. So this is why making your own backups at the beginning of the day or the end of the day of your geodatabase, your layer files, and your project are still a very important function. Save, save, save. Save your edits, save your layer files, save your MXD, your project. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and click OK. Close the project so that I can go ahead and let that dark mode take effect, because remember, it prompted me I have to restart Arc Pro for that to actually take effect. I click on my Arc Pro. I hope I clicked it because I don't know if I did now, and this is going to be really silly. Yay, I did. Okay, so now it'll go ahead and pop up and you'll see that it switched to dark mode for us. That's all that is. That is the functionality of that in and of itself. So I'm going to go back to my options, go back to map and scene. Okay, so in here again, base map. I have this set up to the default of my organization, and I think everyone else's is different than that because I had accidentally signed in to my ArcGIS user account, and it remembered that that was my previous thing because I'm part of an organization. So it defaults to the organization's base map and scene base map setting. You can see there's lots of functionality in here, and I'm not going to go through all of these. I'm mostly going to hit on the main things of what are important to kind of understand. There are going to be some that I will change. There are some that I'm going to let you decide how you want to change. Again, most of these are personal preference things. So base map, whatever. It's your project, however you want to do it. If you're working with the geologic mapping program, we will give you our base map from the USGS topographic data. You will get a base map. It's not a base map from Esri. All of those base maps that they're pulling from sometimes can be dynamic and slow if your internet is slow. Some of them are, I think some of the files get saved onto the computer, so it's not that big of a deal, but it's probably a good idea to recognize that some of those could be a dynamic function and will slow the computer down. Okay, so layer visibility. Anytime you add a new thing in, you can go ahead and make that visible or invisible. I don't know why you would uncheck this ever, because it will only cause confusion if you uncheck this, because you'll add in new data and it won't display. That seems backwards to even have as an option. So anyway, okay. This shouldn't be that big of a deal because everybody is switching to Pro after 3.1. So I'm going to go ahead and skip that discussion point. Spatial reference. You can, by default, set up and define what coordinate system you're going to use for all of your application projects from this point forward. Being in New Mexico, since we split two UTM zones, and being the fact that sometimes we're dealing with the entire state and sometimes we're dealing with quadrangles, these tend to change a little bit based off of what you're actually working with. So if you are always working in NAD 83 zone 13, you can go ahead and set that. More than likely, there are groups that probably work on the state level more often than not. You could go ahead and set that to Lambert conformal Konark or Albers equal area or whatever the case may be for what it is you do. I'm going to leave it to use the spatial reference of the first operation layer. Again, when I drag in my data for the first time, that sets my coordinate system. That then protects me from doing things badly, because the first data set I add in is usually that first operational layer, which defines the coordinate system for the project. You can check the warn of transformations between geographic coordinate systems is required to align sources correctly. By default, Arc is really sweet. You used to have to define all of your transformations in ArcMap. Now you don't have to. It will pick that first transformation for you. If you've ever worked in ArcMap and you remember discussing things early on, you would add data in and you'd have mixed match coordinate systems. You would have to go in and tell ArcMap to set the transformation for the layer that didn't match. Now Arc Pro goes, I know you want to do this, so I'm just going to go ahead and make sure this happens for you. So this now warns if there isn't. Oh, it warns you if there is a transformation that exists. I'm going to turn this off. I just want it to do the transformations for me. If there's still a transformation that doesn't take effect or it doesn't have the math for it, it'll flag that warning so that you're aware of those changes. It's a really good thing. If you've taken my GIS class, you know that I said really early on, make sure you set your labeling engine to the Maplex labeling engine, because the default labeling engine in Arc Pro is Maplex labeling engine. So now this is the reason why we had been doing that all along, is because this is going to be the default in Pro. And after a lot of pushback, Maplex was going to be the only option in Pro until there was a lot of pushback. Now you can set it to the standard labeling engine, which was the default in ArcMap. So again, Maplex labeling engine is a much more functional operational layer for setting your labeling. It's the default now, so there's nothing to set there. If you had a base elevation data set that you were going to work from 100% of the time, so you wanted to use the statewide SPATM, you can set your ground elevation source. Feature cache, you can have it manage the cache of your project in a map tab by itself. Contents pane, what size do you want to see in your contents pane for your symbology so that you can visually see them? And again, I'm not going to go into much detail on a lot of these things. Navigation, how you zoom in, how you zoom out, how you pan, whether you're following the terrain during roaming. Photogrammetry people, you may want to notice this one. Follow terrain during roam. On-screen navigator is the little navigator button that shows up here. I'm not a fan of that, but we'll talk about that because if I'm not mistaken, it's interesting. I thought by default it was full control, and you have a little navigate, effectively compass rose type thing here. I'm not a fan of that. I don't remember setting that to none, so I'm wondering if in 3.2 enough people complained that were like, could that just go away, or something else happened? Because again, to my knowledge, this should be the default settings for Pro on that first install. And then pop-ups, do you want classic pop-ups or do you want to use panes? Do you want to honor the dark theme between your panes and views? Block JavaScript content, show crosshairs when flashing, all of those things, kind of self-explanatory in there. Selection. I want to talk about selection a little bit. I'm going to dive into this one slightly because I have noticed that my eyes in the Pro environment have a hard time picking up the same selection color that there used to be in ArcMap. This is harder for me to see now, and I don't know if it's just because I'm getting older or I have my messed up eye or what. This is harder for me to see now. So you'll see in that first video, if I'm not mistaken, I had the selection color red because it was easier for me to see. And it also does some weird things where it selects the symbology that's used, not the physical geometry. So you used to see that you'd click on a feature and it would highlight the line as a line. Now, when you select a feature, it highlights the line and all of the decorations on there, and it somehow makes it a little bit harder to see. I'm not entirely sure if that's going to stick around or not, because there's lots of talk on the forums for, could you please let us pick whether we wanted to select the full feature or select the geometry? I personally think the issue that I'm having has nothing to do with the color, has nothing to do with my eye. I think it has to do more with the selection of how things are selected now. Instead of selecting the geometry, it's selecting the full symbol, and it just does something weird that I can't quite comprehend what's happening. So you can also make it to where if you select a polygon, you can have it select the interior. You can have it have a hatched fill, or you can have it have a solid fill, and you can see that the solid fill is a little bit transparent. This is what happens when you draw a box. If it's partially within, it'll select everything that's partially within. If you draw a box and it's not fully within, it won't select it. If it's fully within, it will select it. Create new selections. This is the default. I pretty much think I had played with each of these over time, and it did weird things that I wasn't expecting to have happen. And I think about 3 months ago, I went back to just create a new selection. And I'm not entirely sure what each of these do at the core of it, but it didn't behave like I wanted to. So play with these at your own risk, but remember, if you do it and you don't like what's happening, make sure you come back. The other thing that I should have started off with, my recommendation is work with the default settings for a while, with two exceptions. Work with the default settings for a while and then start tweaking them one at a time so that you know what you changed. Otherwise, you don't know what you changed and you don't know what to reset back to what it was. It's interesting trying to hunt down what it is. So my recommendation is leave things alone for a while with two exceptions, and we're about to get to those two exceptions. Or if you like dark mode, and just so everyone knows, dark mode is supposedly better and easier on your eyes. I can speak as someone who has migraines, and I can speak for someone else who has made the same comment who has migraines. The dark mode seems to improve that effect of staring at a monitor all day. Take that for what it's worth for you. I see an effect in my ability to function all day working on the computer. Others may have different, your mileage may vary. So that's the warning of that. Okay, I'm going to skip over the rest of these because it was really only this and this color and the selection stuff that I wanted to talk about that really has an effect. Let's go to editing. And the one thing that I'm going to recommend that maybe you don't keep the same to start with. Back in ArcMap, and we touched on this already in that first video, I do recognize some of this is redundant, but I think this is important to discuss. So that's why I'm going over it again. In ArcMap, when you opened ArcMap and you opened up your project and you wanted to start editing, you physically had to acknowledge that you were going to become dangerous. You had to start an editing session. You had to save your edits, and then you had to stop your editing session. In Arc Pro, by default, you automatically are always in an editing session. When you open Arc Pro, you are in an editing session, meaning you can edit your lines, points, and polygons. And the reason why this is such a warning is it used to actually take an action to make the editing session happen in ArcMap. And most people treated that like a safety net. Your safety net is gone. You've been walking on the trapeze for 30 years now, and they're going to pull the net out from underneath you. So fair warning, you are now working without a net. This is that one option that I do strongly recommend, that if you used that editor start editing as a safety net, I strongly recommend you come and click that checkbox so that you have your safety net still. After working for 2 months with the safety net, I just want to work like I always thought I would work in ArcMap. When I first started working, I was like, why do I have to start an editing session every time? As I got comfortable with that, I put my safety net in underneath my trapeze. And I got comfortable and I started using it as a safety net. And then the safety net is now gone. So now you kind of have to be aware of that safety net being pulled out from underneath you. I like working without the safety net now. It has made me operate faster and how I thought GIS should ultimately do. But because of the inherent risk with automatically being in an editing session, I thought it was very important to go ahead and point out to users. I thought it was absolutely critical to point out. So you can deal with a whole bunch of different things here, and I'm not going to go into what the workspaces are in much detail. Just know that, like your data frames, the active session was active on the data frame. Still true based off of what you do here. Multiple data frames, single data frame, multiple data frame, single data frame. The other thing that never has happened before is the second option that I'm going to suggest that you leave off if you're used to this safety net is automatically save edits. ArcMap has never automatically saved your edits for you. If you had been digitizing for 3 hours and ArcMap crashed on you, you lost 3 hours of work. So there's a pro and con balance that has to happen here. Cool, turning this on, it will start saving your edits every 10 minutes. If, like me, you used to use the editing session as a safety net, and at the end of that editing session, you said, okay, cool, I proved what I wanted to prove. I don't want to save my edits. I want to turn off that editing session. It prompted you, do you want to save your edits? And you'd say, no, I was just monkeying around trying to figure out what I could do. I have now understood what I can do. No, don't save those edits. If this is automatically saving those edits, you don't get a say. It saved those for you based off of the interval. So you get into a risky situation where if it was 9 minutes and 45 seconds and you're like, shoot, I don't know how long it's been, automatically saving may not be what you want. I can speak from my own experience that I have now turned this on and basically understand that when I'm editing and I'm in an editing session and with the ability to set some undos and some things like that, it is kind of functionally more like working how most people anticipated working in ArcMap years and years ago, and it didn't operate that way. So this gave people the things that we have been expecting for a long time. Be cognizant that it will save edits for you. If you have this enable disable, you have a safety net, but maybe not the perfect safety net. The other thing is you can turn on things to save edits when saving a project. So remember, I said save your edits, save your layer file, save your project. If you click save edits when saving the project, it does 2 in 1. Yay, it does 2 in 1. Careful, it does 2 in 1. If you wanted to save your project but not your edits, checking this checkbox doesn't give you that option. It will save both your edits and your project. If you want to keep them separated, so you still have to save your 3 things, save your 3 things. Save your layer file, save your edits, and save your project. It can show you a dialog box to pop up. Do you want to save your edits? So when you're up operating, there's a little save button about right here when you're in an editing session. If you click save, it pulls up a dialog box that says, are you sure you want to save? It only took me about 5 minutes before I went, yeah, I'm done with that. If I tell you to save my edits, please just save my edits. If I ask to delete something, I'm okay if you want to ask me if I'm sure I want to delete that. But if I hit save, please just save it. So this is a personal preference here. Maybe you want that safety net. I did not. Show dialog to confirm discard edits. So if you don't save your edits and you're closing out of the project, it says, hey, you have unsaved edits. Do you want to save these edits? You can force it to ask you whether or not you want to save those edits. This has bugged me a couple times today, but I don't know what the take is on this because I was working on a project for Dan and I've been working on it today in the default setting, not my normal settings. This has been bugging me quite a bit because I go to move something and suddenly it keeps the tool instead of deactivating the tool. So I'm going to say this one is bugging me. Again, this is why I say play with it for a couple days. Find out the things that annoy you, then find the setting that controls that. Because right now, my gut reaction, I'm going to do that because it drives me absolutely nuts. So these are 2 things that I changed right here. I am not saying those are an exception. By default, they came in like this and this and this. I'm going to say you should be aware that if you're scared of your editing session, you should turn this on. I'm going to leave mine off. I like having the direct edit capability right in the get-go. I also kind of like the ability to have this. I also am starting to bump this up a little bit so that if I'm in the process of doing something and it's been 30 minutes and I haven't saved, Maybe because I'm testing something, it gives me a little bit of buffer before it saves its backup. And I'm okay with losing 30 minutes of work. I'm not okay with losing an hour. I'm not okay with losing multiple hours of work. This will depend on you. It will greatly depend on how you operate as well. So take those with the grain of salt that they are. Know you've got a safety net, know you've got another safety net, and make those decisions based off of how you have functioned in Arc before. And recognize that you can change them now. So if you're comfortable with that editing session, turn this on. We don't mess with, oh, sorry, and I want to make sure that I set it for how I want to operate now. Okay. Oh, this is another one. Make newly added layers editable by default. How many times have you been in an editing session? You're like, oh, shoot, I need that layer. You go grab that layer, you drop it in, you go to edit it, and it won't let you edit. It's because the edit session didn't have that as an editable feature because you added it after the session started. Make newly added layers editable by default. It will also honor this. So if you're in an editing session because you've started an editing session and you add a layer, it goes, okay, we'll make that one editable as well. Kind of a neat functionality now. Annotations, we don't mess with them too much, so I'm not going to go into that. Symbology, I'm not going to go into that too much. Versioning, we don't deal with version control too much. Be fair warned that when we start working in enterprise more, we're going to have versioning settings that will be set up for this. Geoprocessing, the big one here is allow geoprocessing tools to overwrite existing data sets in ArcMap. This was unchecked by default. You had to go in and turn this on. So that's the other exception that is different than what you've operated in normally. Normally, it wouldn't allow you to overwrite a feature unless this was checked. In Pro, this comes checked by default, which is different than ArcMap. ArcMap, you couldn't overwrite a feature. Now you can. Fair warning. Yeah, I'm going to skip over those because there's lots of additional things in here. If you have any questions about these, again, figure out what they do. I'm going over the ones that are probably the ones that are going to impact most users. Model Builder. I'm going to skip Model Builder because most of you don't use Model Builder. Dan may be using Model Builder, but I have a sneaking suspicion he's probably using Python scripts or R or Java or something like that to do it. So fair warning, if you are using Model Builder, you have a whole bunch of Model Builder settings for you. Device location, if you've got a GPS that's enabled, this is where you turn on that GPS device to locate you. Catalog browsing, how does catalog behave? Do you want to see the folder name? Do you want to see the full path? Do you want to have the last location remembered? Do you want folder connections to be remembered in the project? Most of these are all the same if memory serves, so I'm not going to worry about those too much. Share and download. Okay, if you've ever worked with any of our Pro packages, you've downloaded it from our website and you double click on it and open it, it saved it to La La Land. Now you get to choose or make it ask you where you want to save that project to. And I'm going to go into this now. I'm going to say ask. Ask me where I want to extract this package to. Now you have control about opening a package where it extracts to so that you know the location of that database so that you can work on that specific database the correct way. Before it would extract it to your C drive, to La La Land. If you made changes, you didn't know where it was actually saving it to because most people didn't functionally operate this way. So now it's going to ask. Now, I don't think that this was the default. If memory serves, the default was unpack to this location, unpack to this location, and unpack to this location. I think because I was signed in to my Esri account when I logged in, I think this changed for me. So be forewarned. I set these to ask me where to unpack. If yours don't say that, you may want to set it to ask you where to unpack. I strongly recommend that because if you've ever watched my video on extracting Esri packages on my YouTube channel, it goes into the details of why it's important to know where you're extracting things to. So that's another video you could go watch and figure out why this is such a important discussion point. I don't want to get into it here. It's not very complex, and I talk about it in that video. Authentication is depending upon external connections for various things. I'm not going to worry about that one. Raster imagery, you can set up some default things. Are you always working with 4-band? Do you want it to display near infrared? So you're doing band 4, 2, and 3 versus 1, 2, and 3 RGB. You can set that up here. What do you want to do with the cache? What raster data set? How do you want to deal with mosaics, perspective, etc.? Each of these has an expansion for the different things that you can go ahead and do. If you work solely in 4-band images, you'll want to play with these settings. If you're only working in 3-band settings, you can kind of leave it alone as is. There's some default things that you can set up for backgrounds, whether you want white to always be transparent. What if your backgrounds are always black? You can always set the black to be transparent, etc., etc. How to deal with cache, build pyramids. I don't remember now, but I think this is always prompt for pyramids, like it has always been, which drives me absolutely up a wall because the only way it'll display is if it builds pyramids. So why are you asking me if I want to build pyramids? Always build pyramids. This is kind of that doesn't really matter discussion point. If you're always working with continuous data, you'll probably want to use bilinear or cubic. If you're using discrete data, you'll want to go to nearest neighbors. If you need that discussion for what the difference is between discrete data and continuous data, take an intro GIS class or come and ask me about that separately and we can discuss what those mean. Effectively, if you're always working with elevations or you're always working with surface elevations or continuously throughput data, you'll want to use bilinear or bicubic. It really doesn't matter, just so you know, because you're not geoprocessing, but it can do different things based off of what you need. Calculate statistics. Yes, always calculate statistics. That's good for that one. Mosaic data sets, I'm not going to get into that one. Perspective imagery, I'm not going to get into that one. These are the accepted raster formats that you can have. Multidimensional. I haven't messed with this much, and I don't know what this does, so I'm not going to go into it. If you've got full motion video in your Arc Pro project, you will need to look at these settings. I don't know of anyone in the Bureau that's using full motion. If you are, let's start talking about this so that we can make sure we're doing the right things, but for the most part, I don't think anybody's using full motion video. Dan asked, will automatic saving affect undo? It depends on whether or not you're processing or you're functioning things that you've been doing honor and undo. Most of your typical vertice moving and stuff like that honor undos, so it should be okay. There are certain geoprocessing where you can turn on the ability, the function to enable undo. That would have an effect on those. But automatic saving, you could undo to step back through, as long as it's one of those functions that honors the undo steps. There are some that don't, just fair warning. Like merging. I don't think merging honors undo. Don't quote me on that. I'd have to look into that. Some of them do, some of them don't. And I've experienced that. And that's the reason why I know that some honor the undo and some don't. Display. Okay, so how do you want your anti-aliasing? How do you want text anti-aliasing to happen? Do you know what rendering engine you would prefer to use? Do you want your clear cache each time the application closes? Go ahead and clear cache each time the application closes. It saves you a little bit of operation on your hard drive, saves you a little space in your RAM to have it clear that cache out. There's a few things in here that I do personally. This is me. I am going to set these for me. I am not suggesting you set these for you. Photogrammetry people, you may want to pay attention to this if you're working with cyan red or 3D shutter. 3D shutter will come up with those people. If you've seen my monitor in my office that sits behind me to the left, that is a new beam splitting technology. It does honor the 3D shutter, but you'll want to note this when we start moving into this ARC stereo projects. You'll want to pay attention to these. By default, they come in off. Most of you will initially be working with 3D shutter glasses. Or sorry, most of you initially would be working with the anaglyph glasses, the cyan red. Some of you will be working with the active shutter, even though it's beam splitting, not active shutter. Just be warned and aware of that setting. Now I'm going to go ahead and enable hardware, and I turned on clear cache. So these are the settings that I have because I like anti-aliasing. I like smooth edges. I like it to be crisp, not goofy. Tables. How do you want tables to happen? Do you want your sub-selected selection to be a different color other than that yellow that the sub-selected selection does? Table fonts, you can set this to whatever you want. I'm tend to do that. That's a personal preference. Your mileage may vary. How do you want your columns and rows to be set up? Some kind of neat functions in here so that you can see more of your text, like in your descriptions of your description of map units data table. I'm not going to get into report. I'm not going to get into the text and graphics. Layout, I guess I'm going to leave those alone for the time being. Color management. For most of the geologic mappers, and for a short time, we're probably going to stick with working in CMYK for making print-ready maps. The world is advancing beyond us now. We're doing less and less real print maps. CMYK limits the number of colors that we can use. RGB opens a lot more colors to us. The problem with RGB is converting to print automatically makes the colors muddy. The other problem with RGB is having more colors to choose from doesn't mean poor human eyes can distinguish between the difference in colors. I am, what do they call it? Trichromic? I can't remember. There's a terminology for people whose cones and rods are super sensitive. I fall into the super sensitive range where most people in that super sensitive range can see between 35 and 39 distinct colors. Most people fall in a natural bell curve below that, excluding colorblindness. Colorblindness throws a monkey wrench into that system entirely. So normalizing for non-colorblind people, most people fall in the middle in there. So having more colors isn't always a good thing because it doesn't mean everyone can see the distinction in colors. Because I work in the print-ish world a lot still, I work in CMYK exclusively because going from CMYK to RGB, the mathematical operation is better and cleaner and more robust. And RGB to CMYK, it has to fake in that black value. So this is that same, if you've taken any vector analysis or what's the other class that you do matrices in? Linear algebra, going from a 3x3 matrix to a 4x4 matrix, you have to invent that fourth column and fourth row. You make things up by doing that. Going from a 4x4 matrix to a 3x3 matrix, all four of those have to devolve into fit in those 3x3. The conversion actually works a little bit better that way. That's not a direct analog because that's not really what we're talking about. It's not a 4x4 matrix. It's not a 3x3 matrix, but it's similar math that has to be done in that linear algebra to get those things to happen. So that's the reason why I talk about it that way. CMYK to RGB works 100% of the time. RGB to CMYK, you only get muddy colors. So I enable the color management as well. And you're starting to see that I've pulled up things that will only take effect after I restart this project. That's part of the reason why I keep doing why I'm going to close this down in just a little bit. We're not doing building modeling, so we're going to skip that. Metadata, everyone, go ahead and switch your metadata to FGDC CSDGM metadata. The USGS requires this for our state map projects. If many of you are going to be working with us, we're required to do the FGDC metadata. My recommendation is just to do it because item description just doesn't contain what's required. You can also turn off this to allow geoprocessing history to be wrote to the project metadata. Indexing, I'm going to skip that because it really doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things. Location referencing, yeah, we're going to skip that too. You can skip that too. Skip. If you work in a different language, there you go. User interface. If you're losing eyesight like I am, you may want to change this to be a little bit larger. If you have amazing eyesight and you want to show off and irritate people who, like me, who are old and blind, set this to like 50%. Really, really make it hard for us to see. Really, this is personal preference stuff. But for those of you who have failing eyesight, notice the direction it goes. So this will help you see if you're having trouble seeing. I'm very sensitive to that now with my eyes the way they are. There's a lot of other things in here that I'm not going to go into, but this is one of those things where if you've ever done Control Plus in a web browser so you can make it larger, this is your Control Plus. Security, I'm not going to worry about too much. 3D input devices, you're not going to worry about too much. Photogrammetry people, at some point, we may have to have you operate with a 3D mouse because it will make operations a little bit easier. You can see how many more buttons there are on this that help you do functionality and button combos. So this is the reason why I'm giving a lot of fair warning to photogrammetry people beforehand. It's going to get different. It works better. It's going to get different, and different means change, and change is hard. So I'm warning you now. We're going to be changing, and I'm sorry if that's the case, but it's kind of what needs to happen. Customize the ribbon. The ribbon is kind of a dynamic environment. You can add whatever you want to that ribbon, much like you added toolbars to your interface in ArcMap. You can do some of those same things in Pro. Remember that it's content aware. So based off of what you have selected, your ribbon will change based off of that. Esri has done a pretty good job with most things of being content aware. If you're doing the right button clicks on the right selection, finding what you need will almost always be across the top. I find that I try to go hunt for it before I look at the active ribbon. And more than likely, I'm on the correct ribbon in the first place if I have done things in the right order. And quick access toolbar. Okay, so that's it. So now if I click OK, those settings are applied, but I have to restart Arc for them to take effect. So I close down. I go ahead and open that project back up, and I will have those settings permanent. Remember, only some of those settings require to restart. So if you got that warning down at the bottom at any point during that, you will need to restart Arc Pro. I'm going to go ahead now and open up this project, and we're going to talk about in the last 7 minutes the different functionalities between our panes in our contents and the pane on the right. So I'm just going to go into labeling and symbology on this one because I'm running out of time. So everyone has asked, how do you symbolize things? Well, it's actually pretty easy. You click on a thing, and over in the right, your symbology tab shows up, right? Look, see, it's there. It's not there. It will be once you start functioning this way. The very first time you ever do this, you right click, you go to symbology, and you leave this pane docked here for all of eternity. And the reason why I say that is because this is the symbology, primary symbology for contacts and faults. If I switch to another feature, now I'm on the primary symbology for geologic lines, generic points, generic samples. If I go into extent, I can see that there's 2 layers in the group. If I expand the group and select my tick points, now I'm working with the tick point symbology. So you'll see how this is now dynamic in how we operate in the GIS environment now. It's not that silly pop-up dialog window that then was only for that symbology that allowed you to, click into a menu, to 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 click into a menu to change things. Okay, you're still going to have to do that, but at least symbology is always up for you, because in order to do things, you have to click into a menu, to click into a menu, to click into a menu, to click into a menu. So there's still this nesting effect that still takes place. And it's in a couple of different functionalities as well. So there's my symbology for a feature. I click on it, it pulls up a gallery. If I don't have it already set up in a gallery and you want to tweak the properties for it already, you have to go into a submenu. Notice I'm still in the symbology pane. It's not popping up 18 windows in front of you that you have to click OK, 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 OK to. You can now tweak those settings here. One of the other comments that I'm going to make is by default, if I make a change, I want it to auto apply now. So I turn on auto apply. I don't want to have to click OK. If I make a setting change, I'm probably changing it for a reason. You may not want the auto apply, but knowing that auto apply happens is convenient. I go ahead and turn on auto apply because I don't want to have to click OK, 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 OK. To get back to that, and there's layered effects, there's offsets, dash, blah, 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 blah. Again, menu within menu within menu within menu within menu. It's not all pop-ups now. It's all within a single pane, and you have the ability to operate within each of those panes. And if you want to get out to that higher level, the back arrow is your navigation function to return back to that highest level of settings, queries, and various other options. And I haven't messed with all of these. I've really only messed with like these. Well, okay, these 4. But now we have that ability to always have our pane open for our symbology to adjust the properties that we want to adjust. It's kind of neat. The reason why I went into this so long is because the labeling functions the same way. So if I want my contacts and faults label to show, which they currently are, you can see that this is now that toggle switch that our map used to have. That box, that blue box, says labeling is on for this layer. If I turn that off, notice the labeling of that layer turns off. Right click, click that, labeling turns back on. If you want to adjust the labeling properties, again, set it and forget it. Open your labeling properties, right click on the feature class, open your label properties. It opens a labeling pane on the right. And now as you click through your different layers, your labeling pane shows up for those layers. So notice what is up at the top here. It changes and lets you know which label you're functioning on. Now, the problem is more often than not, you're going to be working on things and you're going to go, where's my labeling? This is why I say leave these open, so that now you can go to your symbology, go to the feature that you want to work on, and there's your symbology for that. And now I'm happy and I want to go work on the labeling for that contacts and faults layer. I switch to my labeling and it's now content aware on the label, on the layer selected in your table of contents. That's what I'm talking about by content aware. Your ribbon is also content aware. So based off of what I'm selecting here, notice the change in the ribbon as I switch between a map view and a layer. And these will change as well based off of what you're functionally doing within your map pane or your layout. Sorry, your map view or your layout view. Be very cognizant that these are going to change based off of what you're doing. And Esri has done an okay job of preemptively thinking about what it is you're likely going to be doing when you're doing certain things. And it mostly has those functions built for you. There is still no mistaking that occasionally when you want to work on editing things, you're going to have to switch to the editing tab. But while you're editing, you can function in here and do lots of things. You don't have all the editing buttons like you used to when you would add the editor, advanced editing, additional editing options, and all of those. They're now here. This is completely adjustable and configurable for your needs as well. There are already some preset ones in here as well. You can do all tools. And you'll notice that it opened my modify features pane over here. So now I have another pane that I can work from. So while I'm editing, once I'm on this editing tab, great, not a problem. I pull up my modify features. I can then do whatever I need to up here and still have the ability to move. Where is my edit vertices, continue a feature? All of that exists now in this pane. So this is that content aware. If I'm working on these and I switch to this, it doesn't matter which one because I'm editing all of my features. Content aware doesn't apply to this because it's functionality for editing all the features. And there's lots of tools. Okay, so I've gone over by a minute. I hit most of the things I wanted to talk about, and I think I did okay with doing that. If there are any other things that you have questions about or anything that you'd like to know, we'll go ahead and start the question and answer session, and I can go over anything that I talked about. Thank you for letting me jam through that as quickly as possible, and we'll now open it to question and answers. So what do people have questions about? Oh, another comment. After this video is done, I go ahead and stop the session so that the video can start processing. It usually takes me about 45 minutes to edit the video. I usually clip this question and answer session out. The question and answer session is great for prompting the questions that you want me to cover in future lectures. Don't forget, if you've got a question that doesn't apply to this, that is fine too. This can prompt future lecture series. Your input will drive what this lecture series becomes over time. The other comment I'm going to make is if you have any other students or you have any other classmates or you have coworkers that you want to participate in this, feel free to forward my emails to those users, send them my Zoom link, set up your calendar to have that by default as a thing. If you want to be invited to my calendar event for it, I'd be happy to add people to that. I don't want to have to maintain that list as part of the reason why I just add the Zoom link in there. So feel free to keep driving things.